Okay, well, thank you very much, Tatiana, and hello to everybody there in Prague. It's a great pleasure for me to speak to the Winter Academy students yet again. I participated when it was in its birthplace in Moscow some years ago, and it has continued to be one of the most important platforms for exchanging views on various issues of international security in general, and on relations between NATO and Russia in particular. Today, it's more important than ever that different communities of people, not only from Russia but from other Central and East European countries, can exchange views on the most important security issues facing the Euro-Atlantic community. And right now, sadly, there's really only one subject on that agenda right now, and that's overshadowing everything else, namely the situation in Ukraine and Russia's actions there, which have violated international law and undermined all the principles of the post-war security system. And I say that with no exaggeration. I should add, however, that we still believe, we are deeply convinced that NATO and Russia share many of the same interests and face many of the same security challenges, and we should be addressing these challenges together. We should be working to counter terrorist threats, stemming the proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. We need to continue to work together to ensure that Afghanistan can go forward after 2014 as a stable and secure country. And indeed, it was only 3.5 years ago at the Lisbon summit that we agreed on a common vision to become true strategic partners. And we've even done some very concrete work on a number of areas since that time, including countering terrorist threats that might affect public transport, working on excess munitions in the Kaliningrad region. We have a very ambitious work program, at least on paper, for 2014, including discussions recently about a joint naval operation to help get rid of the Syrian chemical weapons. Now, of course, we always had some issues that divided us. Russia continued to oppose NATO's missile defense plans, even though the facts prove that that system is not in any way threatening to Russia. And Russia continues to view NATO's enlargement in a negative light. But we've been able to manage these differences and to talk them through, at least until now. But now, with what's happening in Ukraine, it seems that we no longer share the fundamental belief in the need for stability in our own neighborhood, our common neighborhood, and indeed in the whole Euro-Atlantic area. And I fear the risk that we could be returning to the dividing lines and hostility of the past, because Russia's actions in Ukraine go against the many principles on which we thought we agreed in recent years. The principles of the NATO-Russia Founding Act, the principles of the United Nations Charter, the principles of the Helsinki Final Act and the OSCE, Russia's own bilateral friendship treaty with Ukraine from 1997, and the very important Budapest Memorandum of 1994, in which Ukraine gave up 2,000 nuclear weapons and intercontinental missiles in exchange for solemn guarantees that its territorial integrity and sovereignty would be respected. All these principles, all these agreements seem to have been totally violated by the Russian Federation. President Putin says these measures are consistent with international law, but no one can find any source in international law to justify what has happened. So in recent days, we've had no choice but to suspend the planning for that first joint NATO-Russia naval mission that I talked about. We'll still hopefully work together in other areas to finish the job of eliminating Syrian chemical weapons, but we've missed a big opportunity, I think, to have our militaries work together. And we've had to suspend staff-level cooperation, at least for the time being, while we review the broader NATO-Russia relationship in the run-up to our next foreign ministers meeting at the beginning of April. So the bottom line is what Russia has done in recent weeks clearly affects the strategic partnership that we still would like to build with Russia. But we're not closing the door on political dialogue. We continue to engage with the Russian ambassador, Alexander Vershbow, here in Brussels, as we did last week. And at the same time, we are working to intensify our cooperation and our partnership with Ukraine, aimed at supporting its democratic reforms and helping it to build its security capacity through more joint training and joint exercises. But the only way out of this dangerous situation is through political dialogue and negotiations. Russia needs to stop its military activities and its threats against Ukraine. It needs to allow international observers from the OSCE to move freely into Crimea and to assess the situation objectively there, rather than shooting at those monitors. And Russia needs to engage in a direct dialogue with representatives of the government in Kiev in order to find a way forward to a peaceful resolution of this very grave situation. And I very much lament the distortions and the propaganda that characterize the Russian media's account of events. Groundless charges that every single protester in Ukraine is a fascist or putschist. All these allegations don't stand up to the facts. And time to de-escalate, to lower the tensions, find a political process, bring in international observers, international mediators if they would help, so that we can avoid lasting damage to the Euro-Atlantic security system that we've worked so hard to build together since the end of the Cold War. So, sorry to sound so serious, but we're living in serious times. I do have a few minutes in which to answer some questions. I have to go chair a meeting of the North Atlantic Council on the hour, but I'm happy to take a few questions.
Thank you so much for your analysis. I think that it was extremely important for our participants to know the view of so high level, officials of the alliance. Now, please, the floor is yours. Please, introduce yourself and then the question.
First of all, my name is Central European University. First of all, thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador, for your speech. With your permission, I have a couple of questions to address you. Well, first of all, about Russia-NATO partnership and cooperation, which is assumed to be strategic cooperation, and you mentioned that after the recent events in Ukraine, NATO-Russia cooperation on the level of military and staff cooperation will be temporarily suspended. And I'm curious on your opinion about the transition of NATO military troops through Rebalanced region, how this issue will be solved, to your opinion. And the second question is related to newly established Ukrainian government, because Ukrainian new government declared publicly that maybe in near future it will show to a certain degree willingness to maybe join NATO alliance, and what would be your response to in that matter? Thank you very much.
Probably you prefer to answer this?
No, go ahead. Let's maybe take two more. I'll try to answer them all at once.
Please, two more questions. Yes.
Natalia Tretьякова, Keynote State University. Mr. Ambassador, what's the best scenario of solving the problem around Ukraine in terms of NATO and Russia? Maybe not NATO, Russia, but Russia and West relations. Thank you. I understand it's quite, maybe it's quite naive question, but your view. Thank you very much.
And please, the last question. Yes, please.
Yes, Mr. Ambassador, Pavel Ross from Charles University. I have a question related to, you mentioned that the Russian action in Crimea is a violation of international law and basic principles of contemporary security system. But couldn't the NATO intervention in Kosovo in 1999 also be described as such? And a second question, what is NATO position on the Crimean population for the right of self-determination, which is also guaranteed by the UN Charter, as you mentioned? So could you describe whether NATO believes that Crimean population should have this right, or would NATO emphasize the territorial integrity of Ukraine at the expense of this right? Thank you.
Okay, well, on the first issue, as a matter of principle, of course, our position is that any nation in Europe has freedom to choose its security relationships, whether it's a relationship with NATO or the European Union, and that even could include membership, but at the same time, I don't think that's the most important subject at this time. I think the most important issue is to restore full respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity, consistent with the UN Charter, the Helsinki Final Act, and the bilateral agreements that Russia has signed with Ukraine and has quite flagrantly ignored in recent weeks. The question of the NATO troops inside the territory of Ukraine, if I understood the question correctly. And we have, in the past, conducted some cooperative military exercises under the Partnership for Peace. Russia has been invited to some of those, been an observer at these. And this is the normal kind of cooperation that takes place and has taken place in the post-Cold War period. And hopefully we can come back to conditions when those kinds of peaceful activities where we collaborate to deal with common security problems can be put back on track. Now, on the second question, what's the best scenario? Well, the absolute best scenario, of course, would be a reversal of the intervention that has taken place, restoration of Ukrainian sovereignty, and let the Ukrainians conduct their affairs in accordance with their own constitution. I can't say I'm optimistic that that's going to come to pass, but that's what is really needed in this situation if we're going to see the post-Cold War and even post-war security system that we worked so hard to build, and which Russia itself claims to defend in terms of the principles of the UN Charter, primacy of the UN Security Council, the respect for the principle of non-interference in the internal affairs of other states. All these principles need to be restored, and it's unfortunately Russia that has violated those principles. But I think at a minimum, there needs to be a de-escalation and an introduction, international mediation, bring in the monitors who can give an objective assessment of whether people are being mistreated because of their ethnicity or the language that they speak, and solve these problems through the established mechanisms, including getting the High Commissioner for Human Rights from the OSCE engaged, or senior UN officials. There are international mechanisms that Russia could resort to if it was interested in the rights of Russian speakers. Intervening militarily is not a defensible principle in the 21st century for dealing with concerns about ethnic groups or compatriots in neighboring countries. Now, the last questioner. We start with the second half of the question regarding self-determination. Certainly it is an important principle, but there are also international legal norms that need to apply. Now, I'm not a lawyer. I'm not going to give you a complex legal case. But look, for example, at what's happening in the case of Scotland, which is sometimes being cited by Russian politicians as an example. In the case of Scotland, you had a First, an election which was won by the Scottish National Party on a platform of seeking a referendum on independence. Then you had a legislation by the UK Parliament to authorize and organize a referendum in Scotland, which will take place in October. And in other words, a consensus among all parts of the United Kingdom was reached on the basis of which a referendum will be held on whether or not Scotland should become independent. In the case of Ukraine, you have a constitution which says that referenda are permitted, but they need to be enacted by the national government, national parliament, and the results need to be approved by that parliament. If you allow a system in which regional entities can unilaterally conduct such referenda, it could lead to the breakdown of order, and it set a very bad precedent for many countries. Moreover, the legitimacy of the Crimean authorities is quite questionable if one looks at the events of the recent weeks. The so-called Prime Minister of Crimea actually only got 4% of the vote in the most recent election, but then there was a forced takeover of the parliament at the beginning of this crisis. So it's hard to consider the parliament of the Crimean Republic to have legitimacy, much less the ability to organize a referendum of this kind, and on such short notice with zero international supervision, no safeguards on the process. So that's why I think all Western leaders have said the same thing, that no one's going to recognize the legitimacy of the result of that referendum. Now, Kosovo is often cited as a parallel, and indeed the NATO intervention in Kosovo was not under an explicit UN Security Council resolution, but it was a crisis that had been preceded by years of war, of genocide, of mass expulsion of more than 50% of the ethnic Albanian population of Kosovo. It was the subject of numerous UN Security Council resolutions which considered it a threat to international peace and security. So it was a controversial step, but I think it was the right step. When you had actual evidence of flagrant violations of human rights, hundreds of thousands of refugees, destabilizing the wider region, the whole stability of the South Balkans and Southeastern Europe was at stake. So you don't have that kind of massive pattern of human rights violations going on in Ukraine or in Crimea. This is an artificial crisis that has been precipitated by the Russian Federation. Clearly a long-planned operation, but it doesn't make it any more legitimate just because it has been very, very clever and slick in how it's been executed. So historians can debate the differences and similarities between these different crises, but I would submit to you that the crisis we face today is an artificial crisis precipitated by Russia, and Russia needs to take steps to de-escalate and reverse what it's done.
As far as I understand, your time is over. Yes? Or
I can maybe take one more, not too complicated question.
okay. Please.
I'm Rebalanced from Vershbow State University. Mr. Vershbow, you just said that at the moment, taking into consideration Russia's actions in Crimea, NATO is planning more intense cooperation with Ukraine. And I have one more question considering Belarus. The country which has very intensive links with Russia, but at the same time rather intensive economic links with Ukraine. Does NATO consider to have more active dialogue with Belarus now, more active actions with this country? Thank you.
Well, we have a very limited relationship with Belarus right now, in part because of a lack of interest on the part of Belarus up until the point, but also because of concerns on the part of NATO member states about the state of democracy and civil society in Belarus. I think we would have to wait and see whether there's any greater interest on the part of Belarus in light of the Ukrainian crisis in talking with us. But I don't think we have any plans right now to reach out to Belarus, given the poor state of our relations with that country at the present time. But Belarus, too, has the right to its own sovereignty and territorial integrity. I have a feeling from what I've seen that a lot of the countries of the former Soviet Union, even if they're not openly criticizing Russia, are deeply concerned about the bad precedent that this event sets. For example, countries like Kazakhstan have significant numbers of Russian speakers and ethnic Russians living in their borders. They are privately asking, are we next? We really need to respect principles of international law, the inviolability of borders, the principle that borders should not be changed by force, if we're going to have a stable international system in the future. Russia used to say that they were the biggest defenders of the international system and its guiding principles, but now it's hard to square Russian actions with past Russian statements in that regard. Belarus may be worrying too. Anyways, I have run out of time. Sorry to be so direct, but we're in a very difficult moment right now. But I appreciate the opportunity to talk with all of you, and I know the Winter Academy will produce very lively debates over the next day.
Ambassador, thank you so much. As far as I remember, this is the third Winter Academy that we have privilege to have you as a presenter, as a speaker. Thank you so much. 2 times it was in Moscow, personally, and now through VTC. Thank you so much for being with us, for being so direct. I always appreciate direct assessment, especially in a very crucial situation. Thank you.